Good evening, all, and welcome to DIA's Readings and Contemporary Poetry Series. My name is Francesca Legabo, and I'm the Curatorial Associate at DIA. It is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's reading, as well as welcoming our two poets for this evening, Marcella Durand and Tonya Foster. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Readings and Contemporary Poetry is a part of the Sackler Institute at DIA Art Foundation. I want to thank Levy Gorvey Gallery, who provides major support for this series. Additional support is provided by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, as well as our media sponsor, the Brooklyn Rail. We also want to thank Brooklyn Brewery, as well as DIA staff, in particular Mary Catherine Youngblood and Max Tonone. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Vincent Katz, who will be introducing our readers for this series. Vincent?
Thank you, Francesca, and thank you all for coming out tonight. We're not going to take a break today, so I will introduce our first reader, Marcella Durand, and then after that I will introduce our second reader, Tonya Foster. And if you haven't already, please make a note of the two upcoming readings. On April 10th, we're hosting Steven Seidenberg and Alan Felsenthal. And on May 15th, we'll have Maxine Chernoff and Emily Skillings. So come back for those. Marcella Durand's books include Area, Traffic and Weather, Deep Echo Prix, a collaboration with Tina Dara, and most recently, Le Jardin de M, The Garden of M, Edition Jocaseria 2016, with French translations by Olivier Brossard, and Rays of the Shadow, published by Tent Editions in 2017. Durand is working on a long piece for two voices titled Mirror Lines, and is completing her translation of Michel Métail's book-length poem Les Horizons du Sol, the Horizons of the Soil. Durand lives in New York City with her husband and son. Marcella Durand's poetry has long used the long line, the prose affect, to create poetry as stimulating in its provocative treatment of subject, as in the unexpected slight shifts of syntax and tone that guide her reader and listener to a different point of view. But she has also harbored the short line breaks breaking like waves in the oceans and shorelines that populate her verse. She's even experimented with divided up lines, words taking their own space as breath and visual acuity prescribe. Here's a section from an early poem. Low music, my bed, a park filled with country and arrivals. New music heard on the edge, trip, yes, we like, edges passing overhead, sketch of boundaries on the trip. A recent body of work, Rays of the Shadow, is a series of poems of only a few lines each. The syllabic restriction Durand imposes on her writing here is belied by the grace and range of her language and thinking. A question posed in the first poem could serve as the kind of questioning this poet regularly forces her readers to consider. Quote, can a similar length be imported into a language that is curt and parasitical? End of quote. These poems delve into architecture, geometry, ocean, buildings, petroleum, water, light, air, and as ever, waves, or as Durand puts it, gathered water. She will be reading from Rays of the Shadow tonight, as well as from a new body of work. Please join me in welcoming Marcella Durand.
Thank you so much, Vincent. I'm so thrilled to be reading here, especially with Tonya, my dear friend of many years and companion along the writing way. we've read before, but not like this. Also, thank you all for coming in this non-existent nor'easter. And and the first 6:30 p.m., that is still kind of light outside, which is nice of the year. So I'm going to begin with a poem I wrote after John Ashbery departed for other realms. I thought it would be an interesting beginning to start with an ending. It's called Dictionary of Insolid Things, to J.A. Outside the cries, enter the sanctum, remembering how capitalizing a word can lend a certain effect in places. Certain places that take courage to enter, like cries outside or a double sun rising is reflected in glass covering an artwork, a viewpoint, an accidental one, in the way a poem contains accidents. In that accidents are collisions sparking some sort of action, whether that be whatever it be. Air is a series of collisions. You are a collision. The sun is nothing but collision. And I am writing this for you, a master of collision, allowing it, composed, always interested how things just wrong can be so just right in their indeterminate, inexplicable strangeness. You spoke to that, of it, not just words, but a lot of them and all the meanings they can hold. Held until what? Until they are read, and then held until again. That is a sort of ending that is peaceful yet ongoing. You are ended, but not quite, because I and others go on with words in a poem. This poem, written in front of the spider plants propagating on my desk, more spider plants, both in the pots and on the desk, everywhere you cave me, more earth added to. I come back around to the beginning. This is what I wrote first after hearing of endings. So I'm going to read a little bit from Rays of the Shadow, which Vincent mentioned. So this was about 4 years of writing in 12-syllable lines. And so after I read from this, I'm going to read a little bit of a rebellion against 12-syllable lines, which I don't plan to ever do again. But I do use a lot of enjambments, so you may not quite hear the 12 syllables. So they're not strict Alexandrines, but I did try to carry the sense of the Alexandrine into these. So, and thank you to Anne. Is Anne, who did such a beautiful, beautiful job publishing this. Thank you, Anne. Air allows water in that it carries traces of where it has traveled. It carries those places on a molecular level where spaces form down to basics and water becomes shapeless. Then it transitions to the pleasure of troubling the edges of inhabitants. Still, nothing that it touches will not dissolve. Own form like tongue splits. Ahead of sun, moon, the largest mirror and close. From it, we see a constellation of mirrors, solar lacework, elliptical song, doubles, and then trios. From supposed Earth association, it is hard to be accepted as abstract or seen. Body, appearance, apprehension, against. To offer to you, network, roads, and ongoing. A park is built upon, parking and watchtower. 1,000 night conversations, but only one listener, one listening post of reflection. Stand here and see the river an entirely different way. Underwater is air and through air passage. Color is another wave that takes sand, rocks, bridge. Water will reflect everything but what is inside it. It is like that, trying to describe it. Like that, I scramble along a shore, catching up to the crowds, people standing there, each one a stranger. What do I have to say to them? I want to tell them, but language has divided. We stand divided, each another point, a line. 2 languages to describe sand, each particle gold from a distance, and when dry, stone brown, yellow, dusty, and all. Stone joins to water on tidal journey, becomes salt upon its return to shore, opens to sun, and comes close to melting. And here someone sits, watching the horizon, thinking in halved tongues, progression of colors, water, odd lines. There are two words, leaf and reflection. We could all parlay via these words and grow conversation. Lights find their end in waves as ocean flowers to land under rain. Amorphous water, when will you take shape and line? Like life in a like square, within it is the already seen and said. Reflect, says water, and leaf says light, ardent over the land. So I'm going to read a couple poems from The Garden of M, the title of which I took from a Philip Guston painting, because that's what poets do, right, Anselm? But, you know, I'm M. My name begins with M, so I figured I was entitled to take it. And I like gardens. So I'm going to read this poem called Metaphor Exchange, where I was thinking about equivalences of metaphors in poetry and how you compare all the possibilities of comparison. Metaphor Exchange. The sea can be as milk, but milk can never be as the sea, nor can wine. The salt of sea would not serve in milk or wine, but even more so, milk and wine indicate one sort of state and color, despite wine's own living properties that might make it like ruby or plum. While the sea is, as so many artists have depicted, so many aspects, complexities, again, as silver, as glass, as metal, as glinting, as treacherous, as calm, as yellow, or translucent green, as in a Turner, or as in a Selman's, thousands of penciled gray waves, each slightly different, yet similar enough to create a visual coherence of sea. A meditative thing of infinite elements, a complexity of extensive existence, a thing that drops off the ends of the earth that extends through the core of the planet to reach the other side, that at its depths is a blue so impossible as to be black, inhabited by luminous creatures who do not see red light wavelengths, lost in pressure and distance, and past that vents of fresh earth crust in which more creatures live, feeding off extremes of heat and pressure, and still a thing that washes this planet, makes us unique, unlike anything else, not gas spinning into rings of dust relentlessly blown into again red, a red haze surrounding a sphere. Instead, it makes us deep blue and streaky and many-colored edging the blue, dominance of ever-shifting blue, most fragile of colors, fading and reappearing from black to silver to milk, wine. What could be similar to this? Universe is sea? From our perspective, do stars shift in such complex interaction to change from second to minute? Sky again may not contain such active composition of so many dimensions, though sea imitates sky, and in that way sky leads in color and depthless stability within seconds of change. From here, it may be hard to tell if life is equivalent metaphor. What seems discernibly variable to me may in more distant unfamiliarities seem as symmetrical as an ocean full of waves. So what is sea's equivalent metaphor if not to itself? What is at least somewhat like another? Where in the distance between one and the other is the interaction of complex vibrancy edging into beauty? So here's the title poem, Garden of M, and it starts with a little reference to Agnes Martin. Between figuration and abstraction, she hated circles, many of them together, making that moon-like transition image that shivers the eye, or phases, not like phases. Just like many flowers together, more flowers or trees, lots of trees. Insects, not so much. Bugs, bees, biting, myriads of them, just like flocks traveling across the world, before nets, before guns, before arrows. slings and arrows, cats, feral pigs, dogs, rats, all the escapees. Their populations chew upward an inexorable mathematical increase. Anything laid down on paper resembles a bulge, or a landscape of bulges, of foothills, then mountains, real ones, with cloves, where the devil roams with his little cloven feet when he wants to get away from the world of men. So I'm going to read a brief excerpt from Mirror Lines, again starting with Agnes Martin, because I love Agnes Martin. She hated circles. She hated circles, but octagons were okay. It's possible to stand in a square or a rectangle in a non-circular way, always the same in lines drawn, not rigid. The square one end quivers, certainly not spoken, as circles are often perfect. We stood in the center the same way to look at her works arranged one to each wall, shape, not monotonous but not round, softly drawn straight and along to the other, almost imperceptible of, but enough to question the perfection geometric figures are unless drawn by hand. So I'm going to read this brief piece I wrote as a kind of rebelling against that Alexandrian I was mentioning, and I was reading this amazing book called The Number and the Siren by Quentin Meissayou, some French name like that, where he talked about these studies that found how the mind loses focus after a certain number of syllables. So after reading that, I was like, I just wrote this whole thing with 12 syllables, and I find out that nobody can focus after 8 syllables. And I started with a quote from Mallarmé called "Poetry is Silence's Musician." Breath runs out at 8, and after that 12. Air turns line at 2 times 4. No air after 3 times 4, unless silent E carries vowels past that line. That line, why math it? 8 is the boundary of memory. By 12, one becomes forgetful. Beyond 12, the line loses its vibrancy. Back to 8, double the time of the heart with its 4 chambers, so a line is heart by 2. More than that sequence, language becomes machine, and machines are not memorable. In this time of strange effusion, is it allowed to count to 12 again, or must I conform to beat of 8, deemed most effective in conveying within clear medium of letters following one after the other the doubled beat of heart before escaping beyond reach of brain? But who says brain, furrowed with infinite folds, can't follow number 12 past end of line into gray and foggy realms? Who says gray can't be million shades of water, cloud, and winter? Who says winter is not warmer now in these changing skies? Who says every shade of color isn't more attractive than monotones that dull our eyes and tongue into smaller beats, ending even before brain and much less heart begin? Who says 8 is more than 12, or 4 is more than 8, or so on into 0 and backward to before it all began, whenever that strange knowledge of what is always bending back to what is to come, where numbers end and begin again? So I'm going to double back to this kind of addition to Mirror Lines. Mirror Lines was written in 2 columns and meant to be 2 voices, and I'm still working it all out. But then this kind of mirror, so I was doing a lot of research on mirrors, and I came across the story of Archimedes and his mirrors. So, well, part of this poem is the story, so it starts with the story. The Claw of Archimedes. When Marcellus, the Roman general, placed the ships a bow shot off, the old man, Archimedes, constructed a sort of hexagonal mirror. He placed at proper distances from this mirror other smaller mirrors of the same kind, which were moved by means of their hinges and certain plates of metal. He placed it amid the rays of the sun at noon, both at summer and winter. The rays, being reflected by this, a frightful fiery kindling, was excited on the ship, and it reduced them to ashes. Thus the old man baffled Marcellus by means of his inventions. Marcellus, Marcel, Marcello, Marcella, Marcella, Marzel, Mark, Marco, Mark, Marcus, Mars. Green lion eats Mars. Planet deception of ourselves in red. In space, reflection of sphere, but not duplication. On ground here on earth, mirrors spaced at intervals. Reception of clouds transmit into time. The Claw of Archimedes. Written in the X century as hordes thrashed down the slopes and took almost everything, crumbled poems into pipes and smoked them, or wrapped plant roots around them and repotted them, translating into X, then translated into X, and back into X. Placed in jars and covered with salt, still, they took almost everything. First, coal plants refired, then streams diverted, then mountaintops exploded, then the insects too, the trees and flowering plants. Choking, that was how it began. So we wrote furiously, through words made mirrors of words, acres of flat mirrors of words we trained upon the wooden ships of the oppressors. We could not imagine how heartless they could be. It is so hard to be so one-sided with worry, and we kept writing to keep the words trained upon the wooden ships, training ourselves as we worked to target exactly the wooden ships. But it was so hard to maintain the discipline of aiming the mirrors and writing the words among all of us together, arguing that words, mirrors, maybe would not be enough, and words, mirrors might have maybe been enough, but they were not. And so our cities, always cities, were overcome by the hatred of people living so far apart. Although, of course, being cities and being numerous and diverse, there were those among us, too, who believed in dismantling the administrative state and in none of us together, and instead in living solitary with a wall of guns against phantasms. There were those of us, too, and while they might have helped make us stronger by being the eye of opposition within the Tao of majority, or the tiny amount of poison to strengthen the body, or the vaccine against the larger disease, the blankness of people separating from each other was too monotonous and too inexplicable for us in our beautiful fragmented disagreements to stand against, and we feared for our poems surrounded by paper. We peeled away from reflections and watched the smoke of our words dissipate into the skies as the oil and fumes of their matter combined to form a nebulous something so much more concrete than ever the phantasms fueling the solitary hordes against us. We learned the imaginary ever has a greater hold than what we actually held so hard together. There was dismantling. There was dismantling of the administrative state and living solitary within a wall of machine skeletons. There were numerous strenuous tensions. There was the viewing of others coming over the hill. There were helmets of ceramic tiles. There was heaviness and limbs slowed by the accumulation of metal on the wrists and ankles. Upside down, the boys spun on the rings, over the wheels and inside to the spokes. Through the codes was intelligibility glimpsed, but didn't come to anything. Maybe a word in the sea of dots and dashes, and blinking, some blinking. So I'm going to read an excerpt from a longer piece I've been working on called The Prospect. And this isn't in a form, amazingly. It just deals with the concept of the prospect. Until the river was central, each branch arterial, pulling land along with it in form of pebbles, sand, agglomerate, to accumulate. Thus how beaches are made and people are made to lie down upon them. River pulling the land along with it, pulling us along with it. As we are grass in the wind, so we are rolls of hay, wrapped in disintegrating ribbed plastic, shedding rain in the sun in rolls or hills, subject to pitchforks. People come over the hills with hay to feed cows and other livestock, sheep, goats, and pigs, chickens, cats, dogs, snakes, foxes, marmots, groundhogs, weasels, ferrets, white-footed mice, deer, kestrels, and hawks. Hawks fight in the air, freewheeling territorial encasings, flights over areas mapped out with fierce eye movements and others. First takeoff after the wildlife refuge or rehabilitation, after the loving imprinting, after the puppet held in front of the human face, after nesting in wire and felt, after the leaf trimmings and grass cuttings, the piles of which were once us. The air is so fragrant afterward. The scent of mowing lingers for hours and miles. The sound of the mower, so peaceful over the hills, down to the river, the dust of the mower, tractors moving over the face of the land, then bulldozers and cranes, trucks, the dump trucks, the dumb fucks moving over the hills in clouds of dumb fucks with pitchforks, clouds of dump trucks and emissions, all the emissions, all the equations, all the heaviness of the air tonight. Is the rain moving in? Is the humidity 100% and increasing? Are the winds over 100 miles per hour? Are the shutters closed? Are the bathtubs filled? Is the gin and beer and wine bought? Is the refrigerator plugged into the toaster? Are the flashlights still made of tin and wire? Does the water really smell that way? Is the water turning into fire? Is water rainbowed today? Is the water up to our necks today? Is the hairdryer in the tub? Is the axe in the attic? Are the seatbelts on? What is that beeping? Are we doing a job, a heck of a one? Whose job? What job? Working it out, working it over, working us over, working you over, turning that sod over, turning the sod over, and under the sod, more skeletons, a construction of skeletons, so many as to make a catacomb, beneath the ground, supporting the city we have become, just like that, like that. So I'm going to finish with one of those poems that you somehow find in your pile of big poems just before a reading that you forgot about. And I'd like to dedicate this poem to the NRA. And no, it's not just fuck you. And it doesn't have a title yet. Maybe the title's fuck you. There was sound, neighbors making sounds like wild turkeys or raccoons, possums, skunk trailing through underbrush, eating the mulberries after passing another on the road through a cloud of scent upwind and down. There was light and singing of taps, a sudden bang, and fear of living among uncertain people, the party next door, who are. The safe signs to keep safe, or what's safe from what is safe, are safety. I keep the door wide open deliberately. If I am to be burglarized or taken over, then I shall have done so generously. I condone not the imagining of avaricious peoples coming along the roads for my book collection. I condone not the small signs announcing a security system and video monitoring, nor the small lights flickering on at each wind coming around the corner, nor the false cameras, the radio on at night, and the silhouette of a body at the upstairs window, nor the rifle kept over the door or the shotgun placed under the pillow, next to the bed, in the drawer, the closet, the freezer, or the coffee can. I condone not the guns in the gun cabinet, nor the ads showing revolting armies of blacks, women, liberals, and homosexuals leaving the cities and traveling down the curving roads of similarity and confusion. Roads that curve upon each other, spiraling shells, even greeneries, flickering blue windows at evening. The shadows of ducks and geese upon the communal pond that the houses face upon within clouds of gnats. To hear emigrate the uncatalogued species of pollinators who find the tomato plant sitting inside the solarium and remind us that tomatoes come from a flower, just as flags come from cloth and remembering. I condone not that ongoing remembering of when we arranged humans in a sort of pyramid shape and decided one type of human should be the bottom triangle in a flag of triangles, and representing that human was a color that was then to represent everything dark and frightening during the day and during the night, because we, sewing the flag together, were through our needles designing the terror, and to be brought down from the tops of buildings and inside areas of gathering. Each area in which we come together is open and fibrillating, that sort of bang to not be expected and yet expected. Signs at the doors, the quiet automatic hush as they begin. Thank you so much again.
Tonya Foster is the author of the poetry collection A Swarm of Bees in High Court, published by Belladonna in 2015, and the bilingual chapbook La Grammaire des Os, The Grammar of Bones, Edition Joca Seria, 2016. Foster was a co-editor of Third Mind, Creative Writing Through Visual Art, published by Teachers and Writers Collaborative in 2002. She's an assistant professor of writing, literature, and creative writing at California College of the Arts in Oakland, and is a poetry editor at Fence magazine. Tonya Foster is a poet of place, but equally a poet of sound, whose twisting of meanings is always purposeful. Her playfulness is a chisel used in her skilled hands to cut and fashion pictures of our shared history in these United States. Beyond too, perhaps, but for now, I feel a real concern on Foster's part to describe, to depict, although not always literally, tragedies as well as daily lives that are the result of this country's trajectory. There is also an unmistakable visual element in Foster's poems on the page. Their layouts, repetitions, but also transformations via parenthetical letters of nouns and pronouns. As always, she writes, there is this hill we climb, our thicket of stroll and stutter, roll and utter. In three-line stanzas, Foster conjures worlds, quote, click the remote, cough into the dark tree of our hands, swallow. Then there are refrains, long-limbed couplets or incantation, enjoying, glorying in pleasure, while the mind engages in inquiries into language, neighborhood wiles. She may be reading from Swarm, or she may read from new work tonight, but whatever she reads, she will take us to very specific interiors and outsides. Please welcome Tonya Foster.
Thank you very much, Vincent. And thank you, Marcella. That was breathtaking. It's amazing to be here since I just moved from New York. And at the moment, I feel like I'm not writing much poetry. I'm finishing a dissertation. And I don't know what that means, except for when I read Mahmoud Darwish, and I was reading his mural, and there's a line in it that's something like, Where now is my where? And somehow that just really got me thinking. And so now I'm in the middle of a poem, a portion of which I'll read to you, but I won't read to you the part that I was sort of flung into by Darwish. So I'll start with that. And strangely, it's called Etiquette. It was once called something about light and its tender hieroglyphs. But I decided that was a little too fancy, although it appears in the poem. And I like to start with that because I will be reading pieces that are unfinished for me. And I hope that's okay. I'll also read from Swarm. And I didn't thank you, Vincent. Thank you so much for having me. You leave New York and you kind of worry you're going to disappear, or one worries you'll disappear into the nether of the world, the rest of the world, I should say. So apparently I don't remember my impossibly long password. There it is. Etiquette. There are two epigraphs. All conduct, and this, I should also tell you, is a part of a letter to my two nieces who are 8 years old. So it's actually a letter to the future women they may become. All conduct should be so straight that you can measure it with a plumb line. And injustice exists in abundance, but evil can never succeed in the long run, which is much more optimistic than their aunt is. 1, to say light casts its tender hieroglyphs on the mundane and cataclysmic equally is to go straight for inaccuracy. Light precedes the hieroglyph, and this hieroglyph offers meager insight into the nature of light, beyond some minor perceptions. Shall I ride the alliterative waves of inarticulation and silence that fog my mouth and mind? Or just let the words like particles roll, see where and what that gets us? 2, toddler head tilted, forefinger pressed against the side of his tender jaw, M poses, looks like he's thinking, looks like he's looking at me, looking at him. In the photo, looks like he's looking through the remnants I made at each you who holds the photos before your face, no matter how long after you're looking at him in this looking out. This is hysterical. It'd be funny if it were my sister. That's my phone. You see in the looking out and your looking in something of the self that you years later will come to know, will come to be, and to know and to be are forms of loving, are forms of holding a body and ideas of looking and of bodies and a mind like a prism. 3, to say light falls or night falls is to speak of space, the curvatures we navigate. Bloodbound, we are at B's Las Vegas wedding years before you are you. And M has just learned that a camera assembles and refracts. I point, he points, each shot a we. In a would-be drowned city, what one girl saw of grief was the war-lost father and a baby brother laid out like expanses of water we, even as we stand on far shores, must cross. And the girl and M and you and I are bloodbound. It is sassy to say, I see. Sassier to say, I see you. Sassiest to say, I see you looking at me, to call out what we are looking for. 4. I'm trying to see if I can move off of the computer. Perhaps not. 4. For a time, grief politely organized the waterlogged girl politely. In a family photo, she sits center, hands folded in her lap. I hear that she was for a long time largely quiet, holding her grief-strung tongue the way a proper lady is meant to. A woman watches her P's and Q's woman through the delicate clearing of her bangs or the smoothing of her skirt, value biologically determined, socially performed. In some corners, to ask, what are you looking at? Is another way of saying, what do you want? Is another way of saying, keep that shit to yourself. Is another way of saying, I'm not available for the viewing. 5. And awake is a kind of viewing, a view into the substance of darkness over-focused and announced. Not sure where I am. I'm about to begin homework. You're just saying that so you don't do nothing around here. Homework is a nothing beside housework. And I'll stop there. This next piece is also unfinished and is not quite a poem, but is meant to be a poem. And it's called Thingification. And there are 3 epigraphs. An animal cannot be judged or held responsible for following its strongest impulse. Second, in following his strongest impulse without question or reflection, he has failed to exercise his capacity for the kind of intentional control over his movements that makes him human, us human. Christine Korsgaard and Franz de Waal. Because I believe that our first moral obligation is to members of our own species. 1. If what it is to be human depends on the capacity to exert intentional control over one's own movements, one's own body, is the quadriplegic girl or the slave or the prisoner or the child less than human? Intentional control, some biologists point to. Capacity depends on much. As if we hadn't learned how the cheeky alchemist owner works to change blood and flesh and breath into merely gold or diamonds or coffee or fish or cocoa or tomatoes or cotton or woven rugs or cell phones or chocolate candy bars or cash or discourse. 2. Think of Frederick Douglass, of the name Frederick Douglass, of the idea Frederick Douglass, of the historical discourse that says there was a Frederick Douglass, that there was the Frederick Douglass figured historically. Think of the epiphany occurring, think of what occurs of that epiphanic moment in the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, when he refuses to be beaten again. That moment when he claims to prefer death to taking a beating from any man. Shortly before this moment, he'd taken to wearing High John the Conqueror root on his right or left side, I can't recall which. He's a young man when that happens, and it's a very macho moment. This meeting of violence with violence, apparently effective. Douglass describes his physical response as unintentional. He catches Mr. Covey off guard. Sadly for him, his body could not resist the beatings. According to Douglas, though he would for another 4 years remain a slave in form, he would never again be a slave in fact. 2a, a slave in form. The word form is from the 13th century Old French forme, meaning physical form, appearance, shape, image. In this definition, the exterior is prefaced, what we humans are able to perceive. A woman, in all appearances, pushes a child in all appearances, not her own in appearance, in a stroller down Broadway near 79th. How is the mother figured? I see them and would never ask about what their appearances don't reveal. They are an image of mother and child with all the attendant meanings. Her purpose in this image seems apparent. The deviant of the mama is the mammy and the Jezebel and the witch. What political, and I'm skipping over a few things, but what political and social conditions condition voluntary? A beautiful young woman, appearance again, in expensive clothing and jewelry, visits a home in a small Mexican village. Her appearance is important here, a signifier of her wealth which stands in contrast to the inhabitants' poverty, and to their home, which is a precarious shack, offering necessary but uncertain shelter. The beauty works, she says, in a restaurant, or as a cleaning woman, or as a housekeeper. Despite her dress, she keeps her claims decorously modest, something almost anyone can attain in El Norte, even someone living in a precarious shack in the South. Like the inhabitants, the woman is deaf. She offers herself and her beauty and her deafness as signs of a possible future. Pied Piper piping, follow me north. Today, estimates are that 27 million are enslaved. And I'll stop there with that one. Okay. A few less unfinished works, or more finished works. In tongues. I'm interested in the idea of speaking in tongues, which I realize not a lot of people know about. It's a kind of Pentecostal thing, but the idea that you're touched by the divine and then speak in tongues. And there's a way that do I say this? And there's a camera. There's a way that I sometimes think that poetry is about certain kind of speaking in tongues, or the possibility of speaking in tongues, and the divine as that sort of experience of the soul through the body, because that's the only way we get to know the soul. But in tongues. Because you haven't spoken in so long, the tongue stumbles and stutters, sticks to the roof and floor as if the mouth were just a house in which it could stagger like a body unto itself. You once loved a man so tall, sometimes you stood on a chair to kiss him. 2. What to say when one says, "You're so musical," takes your stuttering for scatting, takes your stagger for strutting, takes your try and try it again for willful, playful deviation. It makes you want to not holla, silence to misperception's face. 3. It ain't even morning or early, though the sun-up says day, and you've been staggering longed while, gegen a certain breathless stillness that we can't but call death. Though stillness suggests a possibility of less than dead, of move, of still be. 4. How that one calling you're trying music, calling you're saying entertaining, thinks there's no then that we, who then that we? Remember, trace in our permutations of say. What mastodonic presumptions precede and follow each word, each be, each bitter being? 5. These yawns into which we enter, as into a harbor. Come, go, don't, says the vocal oceans which usher each us, so unlike any ship steered or steering into. This is a habit of place and placing a body. Okay. And this next piece is, well, I'll end with that piece. This is from Swarm of Bees in High Court. The title is in conversation with a painting by Max Ernst called A Swarm of Bees in the Palace of Justice. And I carried an image of that painting with me for years. That I printed on one of those jet printers, like jet printers. And so I carried it for years because for some reason I really was obsessed with the kind of parsing of the visual field that was Ernst's sort of work in this piece. And I also was struck by the title. And I eventually, when I kept trying to write the poem that would have that title, and I couldn't do it. Or I tried after many false starts. There were sort of these poems, and I realized that, I don't know, that somehow the formal constraints that I was using meant that it couldn't work for me. I was being too narrative. And so I began to write these haiku, and a friend had asked, someone had asked me to write about, this was years ago, about 9/11, and I'm like, are you kidding? Who can do that? But I was writing haiku to a guy I liked. And someone said, why don't you write haiku? And so then I began to hear everything in 17 syllables. And so I would write in my sleep. I'd write these bits of things walking down the street, and I would hear it, but I would also hear it when people spoke to me. I'd break it into these 17 syllables. And it did something in that it broke up my own narrative tendencies. And so I wrote this thing about insomnia and grief. And it's one long poem, but I kind of was having fun with the titles, which are just kind of interludes. So, A Swarm of Bees in High Court. A mind is master, but the flesh is boss. Boned up, toned, taught, or taught. A mind is master angels of incidents to shake a booty down. Harlem Nocturnes. As always, there is our black robe, our tock-tock clocks, our gates and gravel. As always, there is this hill we climb, our thicket of stroll and stutter. As always, there, here is, just is, us, was and will be, our perennial knots. As always, there, here is, unravel M's of was, will be's, is, us, tongues. insomnia. Beside her, he lies curled, sleeping apostrophe, possession, and oh, mission accomplished. Again to this his sweat, now sleep, but not for her. Sleepless eyes like stagnant city pools, saltiness, then this thirst for ice. Another night's gradations of darkness become the counted sheep. Another night's darknesses like tar, like silt, like steel wool coil along her screen's narrow field of light. She wants to shout into the pastoral sleep of this his face, to shout at how sleep absents him, dissolves him from, in, to himself. Pussy is condition, al, ing, and and position, chromosomal, prepositional. Behind them, brackish water bangs through bathroom pipes, through the evening's TV tones, through this cask of sleep. Click the remote. Cough into the dark tree of our hands, swallow, allow your voice back into the back dark spit of her throat. Love's silence comes on. Can running her finger like a hiss along this his clavicle trip up parenthetical affection? Full of sleep, this dark husk pulls closer. Cat-tone and cat-woo meow meows under the closed bedroom door. Unmet desire ain't nothing but a mother of unintention. As she stares into her TV's 2 a.m. glares, watches the way. She once watched a boy's body, too quick for caution and traffic signs parse the asphalt. Neighborhood boy, corner boy, man to be. Been. Bones. Man to be, been, bones. Man to be, been, bear this. Man to be, been, bones. Done and gone? What good is light on that? To want and not ask. To want and not ask. To want and not ask to want. To want and not ask. She in somnium dramas gets chased round the block by rabid white dogs. She in somnium drums up the dreary, damned, stalks interstices, 'cause body ain't only a grammatical sentence. There's no fleeing flesh, with music so loud and sirens that you forget disquieting stars. She's come to take this as survival gospel for suburban souls. In soliloquies. Now, earthworms ain't maggots. Eating them ain't planting a tree or a flag. She wants to shout at her TV when some Sue gulps earthworms from a cup. She wants to shout at this idea that there's payback for what's done to come. Earthworms aren't decomposers, nor distraction from street corner noise. You think a woman would know this, she thinks this thought? A squirrel on a lawn. You think a woman, there are thoughts of other women, more squirrels. Her mother, I'd hate you to miss sex, when she wanted to be a nun. Her mother, I'd like to hear this, what do you know about a man? When she wrote home about her lover whose mother taught her to knit. When she wrote home about knitting, she was still girl incognizant, still the girl writing, we are the faces we wear, where? In flashback. Still the girl with a face like a movie screen who knits skull caps with yarn, red as cartoon blood, as red as Mammy Two-Shoes shoes, matchstick heads, yarn red as cartoon lips and tongues, red as bandanas and pomegranates. Red as blood butterflied across the seat and white of summer culottes. Red as blood that says woman, maybe mother, says watch and count. Red as velvety cakes she thawed and ate over 2 months, morning times. Red as velveteen curtains she wanted to drape around this moment. Red as morning, as bluster, as bluff, as the flat of offering plates. Red as morning, as unheeded signal to stop, as sliced, rare meat. Red as cherry now and laters, as pickled pig's lips, as bruised knuckles. Red as cherry blow pops, as big red gum, as loitering before sleep. Red as distant red hook bees drunk on cherry fungicide cocktails. Red as distant space mapped, bought and belonging to brutish say-so. Red as the administration of districts and blocked off blocks. Red as the administration of want, as the red-handed wave so long. Red as red squirrels, as maples, as districts set for and lit with wanting. Red as red squirrels, North American, Eurasian, native, migrant. Red as red as red. Ass red as a baboon's ass is red. Come on, stop. Red as red ass red. As the seeping of coulda, woulda, you know. Red as subjunctive being the butt of taken and took down. Red as subjecting beings becoming to merchandising lines and limits. A red letter day in the red light district of insomniac night. A red letter day for seeing red scare the shit out of reason. Red culled from rubia or madder root lends the hermit majesty, the woman infamy. Red culled from the sawdust of the Brazil wood tree, primped a pope's robes, pimped pussy. Red culled from clay, from crushed conchineal, kermes, from worms dried and ground. Red culled from cinnabar, mined by the enslaved, the imprisoned, not eyes. Red as compass, gauge, a stripe, a strike, as undertone of home. Red as compass, gauge of light, cycling the edges of 620 to 740 nanometers. Red as was here, as becoming not here. Red as note and gone and not. Color that the temporarily colorblind first perceive, red. Be utterly fly, swims through corner voices, to be is to be. Be utterly fly, be itch, be road, be ache, between want, have, reach. Color that disappears in early film, black, boot black, blue black. Be low, be lack, be ridge and grudge, be longing, be sodded, be ramble and hold, be come and go, be rim and ram the ball into the basket, be ram in the bush important, be stung, be ache, be ring, be reft and reach over, be attitudes of bee sting, be head nigger in changes of the light night's brigade, be moan and own ow, below beehives, the haves harvest. She, be tired. Look back at them. See if they are looking back at you. What he know about silence? How it settles in a throat like swallow. How it settles like swallowing water or seeds they say might take root. How it settles like feet into the dailiness of their own falling. What she know about be coming to mind at times he thinks she don't think. How her throat tightens, like a branch on which cataclysmic swallows roost. How her throat tightens, tracks through slow syllables, memory's algebra. Geometry of a park pool. A boy presses her 12-year-old head, geometry of an air-filled melon beneath water with deft hands she struggles against. Someone she can't remember sees her thin arms as she struggles against his hands, their struggle breaking the water skin. As if to make plain the difference between a thought and a need. As if to map the shifting climates between words and bare knuckles. As if to show her knowing wasn't needing. He says he was playing. His young voice filled already like a snow globe with the coming winters. As if to show her the winters between words and his budding fists. He laughs. His young voice fills all her thoughts of water, wades in each new syllable. Yesterday swarms in the arrow of our thoughts as he lies there, here, sleepless. Yesterday swarms in. To eat or not to, then what? She clears her throat. And I'll end on sort of happy note. I don't know that it's a happy note. You know, a friend, student asked me about joy and asked me who are the poets of joy. And all I could think is, you make the sorrow swing, that's what you've got. And so she said, what? And I said, you make the sorrow swing. Because, you know, not that sorrow is all you get, but the real joy to be had is in sort of dealing with the state of things and making something else. So this is, and I've read this piece a lot, and it actually wasn't meant as a poem. It's part of a longer essay that I will get to once the dissertation is done, which supposedly I'm graduating May 30th, though, once I have a defense, right? So let's not applaud yet. Got to have the defense. But this is from that thing, Mathematics of Chaos, and it's New Orleans bibliography. And it's sort of, it's voices, and it's for me related to that question from Darwish, right? Where now is your where? And I think I'm always looking for that, and how do I understand it? How do I articulate it? How does language articulate it? And this is New Orleans bibliography. In language, in landscape, inscape. In language and landscape, inscape. In only after taking in my mother language, along with the voices of that place, a girl who looks like her father is born for luck. Alcohol, Algiers, alligator, amazing grace, Amelia, Angola, Atchafalaya, Aunt Noni, Aunt Sister, Azarine, back of town, Bayou, because her daddy died or left, because the firstborn baby died, Beignets, bitch, Bootsy, Cafe au lait, Callio Projects, Canal Street, Cardella, Cast Iron, catching coconuts, catching sense, Cayenne, Clio Street, cockroaches, comb them kitchens, Congo Square, cornbread, courtyard, cousins, CPT, crawfish, Creole, dark, darker, dark-skinned daughters, dead end, desire, desire projects, desire unmet is desire, multiplied. Dirty Rice, Dorothy, Elysian Fields, Erato, Etouffee, Euterpe, Ezekiel, Father John's, Flea, firstborn done died, Fleur de Lis, Flood for true, Front Porch, Galvez, Girt Town, gimme some, girl, gimme got shot, get up in here, God don't like ugly, good hair, grandma, grandpa done lost his mind, grief grown rooted and wild, grief like dirt, hard-headed, hard-hearted, her mouth don't know no Sunday, high yellow, Holy Ghost, hoodoo, how sweet the sound, how y'all doing, how your mom and them, I ain't playing with you, no, Jax, Jambalaya, Jazz, jump back, jump rope, Katie, kick back, kick your ass, kitchens on your neck, knickknacks, Kool-Aid, lanyap, lakefront, left, levy, leveraging, light skin, lighter than a paper bag, Louis, St. Louis, Louis XIV, my belle, my dear, magnolias, make groceries, Martin Luther King Boulevard, Melpomene Projects, memory, mental ward, Mississippi Bridge, Mississippi River, Miss Myrtle, Miss Tit, Moriel, morning, mosquitoes, morning, mud bugs, muffalata, nappy-headed, neck bone, Nutriground, Nutrirats. Nobody likes a bone but a dog. NOPD, not luck enough to keep a body strong. Okra gumbo, out front of town, oysters, pecans, pickled pig's lips, pispo, po' boys, porch monkeys, potholes, quadroons, quarter, quiet, rain through the living room windows, red beans, red bone, Reverend Prophet, rice, river, rue, saints, sedity, sassafras, sachimo, screen doors, semen, seventh ward, snowballs, speak the word to me. Spit on the broom to stay out of jail. St. Charles Avenue, Stronger Hope Baptist Church, Superdome, Swamp, Tambourine, Chapatulas, Tender-headed, Tender-hearted, Tenderoni, Terpesqua, Thought, throw me something, mister. Tipitinas, trouble don't last always. Uppity, vagina, Virginia, voodoo, wade in the water, wishes go the way of sweepstakes. Where you at? Where you from? Woman, wrought iron, your ma, your pa, your greasy grandma. You ain't nothing. You thought like Aunt Hannah who thought cat shit was banana. Xavier, Zataran, Zulu, Zydeco, amen. Was speech possible? Only after taking in my mother landscape was speech possible. Thanks.